All right, we are in a new series called The Table, and it's meant to be, this is going to be a little bit of a family series, but also a series about hospitality, about relationships, about friendships, and about serving like Jesus did around tables. On the family aspect of things, it's interesting over the last 10 to 15 years especially, families are spending less and less time around tables. Just in the busyness and in the world we live in with technology, there's less time being spent around tables and more time spent in front of devices, screens, or on the move. Interesting, I was reading some statistics this week. In the past 20 years, the frequency of family dinners has declined 33%. In addition, a recent poll by YouGov found that 62% of parents with children under 18 wish they had more families together and more often or somewhat more often. According to the National Center of Addiction and Substance Abuse at Columbia University, kids and teens who share in family dinners three or more times a week are less likely to be overweight, more likely to eat healthy food, perform better academically, engage less in risky behavior, i.e. drugs, alcohol, sexual activity, those kinds of things, and have a better relationship with their parents. Just every study that I read this week indicated that the more time that families spend around tables, the better off everybody is. And yet, in our society, we've been moving away from that. And so this series, we're going to challenge, and I know that in this group this size, okay, and with this diverse of ages, that we're at different ages and stages. Not everybody is in my age stage where we have kids in the house, and I recognize that some of you are not there with that. But what I want to challenge us with it through this whole series is that we find tables to be around. Whether that's with our family, if you have grown kids, that your grown kids come back. We're going to challenge you throughout this series to just spend more time at the table with friends, with coworkers, with colleagues, with lost people, all throughout this series because Jesus, and we're going to see, spent a lot of time at tables. We'll get to that in a minute. But one of the ways we want to do this, especially for you families that have kids in the house still, but even those of you who don't, who have grown kids, we've put together these table boxes, and these are going to be right outside as you leave today, right on the table as you leave. And inside here, what we have is just a couple things. Number one, there's a start here. So if you're questioning what to do, you start here. All right, start here with this. But inside, we gave you this box primarily, especially parents with teenagers, phones go in the box for dinner. All right? So, and parents, phones go in the box for dinner. Okay? So we engage. Here we gave also a family bingo game. Okay, and on this bingo card, there's different activities that you get to do with your family throughout this series. Okay, for the next 5 weeks in this series, plan a family activity at the table or like a board game or craft. Kids serve the meal. Pray with your family before the meal. Plan and cook a meal as a family together. Kids' choice. That means kids get to choose what you eat. All right, how about that? Family dinner, a virtual meal with distant family. So set the phone, you can have the phone out for that one or the iPad out, and FaceTime family who is distant from you and have a meal over FaceTime and eat together even though you're in different spots. Create a theme for the night, all sorts of different activities. So what we want you to do is do these activities throughout the next 5 weeks within this series. As you fill out the bingo card, once you fill out your bingo card, bring it back because we're going to put all of those into a drawing for 3 different baskets that we're going to give out at the end of the series that's going to help you as a family even engage more together. So fill these out, do these activities, and bring it back. And then also in here are some conversation starters. There's 30 different conversation starters. I know that sometimes as families, we sit down and we're like, what are we talking? How was your day? Good. How was your day? Fine. And then everything gets quiet, right? How many of you can relate to that? So if you need some help with some conversation starters, pick a couple of them out and have conversation around your table. So anyway, this is just a fun thing we're doing on the side. grab it on your way out today and have some fun with it. Make it your own. Adapt it to your family, to your context. And just the whole point is this. We just want you to connect at the table. I want to, throughout this whole series, again, we're just encouraging us to spend time at the table because so much of life happens around tables. Think for a moment about the different types of tables you've sat around at different moments in your life. School lunch tables, right? You got together around a table and everybody's a little bit nervous and we sat around lunch tables at school. Coffee shop tables, you meet friends there. You guys likely on your first dates, you sat around a table. You remember the nervous energy around that table. Picnic tables where we're outside and enjoying the sunshine that will eventually come back to us one day, maybe, hopefully, sometime in the future. Work tables, conference tables where we collaborate with coworkers. We eat meals around tables with our family. So much of life happens around tables. In fact, much of your story, I'm guessing, much of your life story could be told somewhat around what happens at a table. Just think about all the different important moments of your life that have happened around tables. And that's not just true of us, but this is true in Jesus' ministry as well. And so throughout this series, we're going to look at 5 snapshots of Jesus' ministry where he was around a table, and we're going to see what he did there. This is going to be a little bit less about a series about what we hear Jesus saying, although that's important, and we are going to look at that. But what I hope throughout this series is that we're going to see Jesus in action. We're going to see what he does in life, where he goes, who he sits with, and what he does in these moments. Luke especially, it's interesting that he highlights Jesus' ministry surrounding tables and meals, like way more than we would ever expect. One scholar started looking into the correlation in Luke's gospel about this, and he said that every time we see Jesus in the Gospel of Luke, he is either going to, at, or going away, moving away from a meal. Luke just goes over and over and over, and I didn't really believe, when I read that, I was like, that doesn't seem right to me. And then I started kind of flipping through, and I didn't realize how much Luke just highlights Jesus' ministry around tables and around food and around eating. In fact, in Luke's gospel, 60 plus times it references Jesus around a meal, around a table, around eating. There's got to be something to that, right? If Luke, Dr. Luke, who was trying to put together this orderly account of what Jesus did, references Jesus at meals and around tables so much, there's got to be some significance there. And so we're going to look at that for the next 5 weeks. 5 moments in Jesus' ministry around a table. And the first one we're going to find is in Luke chapter 5. You can turn your Bibles there. You don't have sermon notes, much to the chagrin of some who have given me a hard time over that today already. But here's your sermon notes, Luke chapter 5. There it is. Open up, and we're going to spend all morning on 5 verses here. Starting in verse 27, we see this. After this, he went out and saw a tax collector named Levi sitting at the tax booth, and he said to him, "Follow me." We'll pause right there. Jesus comes to a man named Levi. We know Levi better by his name that Jesus gave him, Matthew. He's the guy that wrote the first gospel event in our New Testament. Matthew. But before Matthew was the apostle who wrote the gospel in our Bible, he was Levi, the tax collector. Tax collectors in that day were even more hated than IRS agents are today. I find it ironic that we are talking about this passage during tax week, right? Where we have, and we think about taxes, and we've all kind of been in that headspace recently in taxes, and we even think about taxes, and we're just like, oh, man, right? Those tax people. And Levi and tax collectors were even more hated back in Jesus' day. They were primarily Jewish men who decided to go work for the Roman government and tax other Jewish people. So they were almost the most hated people in that society. People did not want to see them. They were sellouts. They were working for the enemy. Jewish people very much looked at Rome as the enemy, and they hated these tax collectors because they sold out. They were employees of Rome. And so because of that, tax collectors really didn't fit in anywhere, right? Tax collectors, they weren't Jewish enough to be accepted by Jews anymore because they were sellouts, and they weren't Roman enough to be able to hang out with all the Romans because they were Jewish, and so they just didn't have a place to belong. They were just kind of a group in of themselves, and we'll see that in a minute when Matthew here throws a party. That's why he invites just everybody he knows, which is other tax collectors. They were in a category of their own. They were, most of them, cheaters. They cheat people out of their money because Rome set it up to where here's the percentage that you have to pay in taxes, but nobody knew that except for Rome and the tax collectors. And so what tax collectors would do is they would set the percentage of the taxes, and then they would add a couple percent and they would pocket the rest. And Rome didn't care if they did that as long as they got their money. And everybody kind of knew that was happening, but they didn't ever know how much more they were being charged. And so everybody just thought down on tax collectors because of that. They were cheaters. So we can assume that Levi here was somewhat lonely. We look at a guy like Levi. What's the profile of a guy like Levi before he meets Jesus? Well, we can assume that he was fairly well off. He was probably upper middle class to upper class. He had a job that made really good money, and he had possibility of advancement to climb the career ladder. He could become a chief tax collector, and so there was opportunity for him to grow in this area. He was living a very comfortable lifestyle. He was not very religious, probably, because a true Jew, a true religious Jew at that time would never become a tax collector. So he wasn't probably very religious, but he probably grew up with it as a child, somewhat lonely, most of his friends being other people that did the same thing. He was probably pretty comfortable in life, but something was missing. Does that sound familiar? Do you know people like that? Fairly well off, maybe middle class, upper middle class. Life just kind of revolves around work. Somewhat lonely people, but fairly well off. Just worried about their career, worried about climbing, not very religious, but they probably grew up with it, or they had somebody that they knew in their past that took them to church, but just kind of life got in the way, and they got busy in their career, and they just kind of fallen off. They seem on the outside like they're doing pretty well, but on the inside, there's something missing. Do you know a Levi? Do you know somebody like that? I would say that our world is full of people like that. Our country, our community is full of Levi's, full of people exactly like this. Does this describe you at all? Somebody that's pretty comfortable in life, but you feel like there's something missing, something that needs to change. I love what Jesus does. He comes along here, and where everybody else would have gone by Levi probably trying to avoid eye contact so they didn't get taxed more, these tax collectors, they could just charge whenever, wherever. They could just be like, hey, come here, pay up. There was another kind of tax collector. We're not sure exactly if this is Levi, but they could charge to use the streets. They could charge if they were sitting down by the lake and a fisherman came and brought his catch up. They could instantly charge them a tax on it. Just make up a number. So where most people would walk by Levi and just be like, don't make eye contact. You know kind of how we do to homeless? Don't make eye contact. Jesus. He looks right at him. He's like, Levi. Calls him by name. I'm guessing that most people didn't say his name, at least his given name. There was probably a whole bunch of other words given to Levi. He says, Levi, follow me. Follow me. Let's see what Levi does. It says, and leaving everything, he rose and followed him. Leaving everything. You see, Levi's following of Jesus is a little bit different than the other disciples. The other disciples, the fishermen and the guys who just worked with their families growing up, they had a backup plan. They could always go back. In fact, we see the four fishermen, they do go back to fishing at times. Levi, when it said he left everything, he didn't have a backup plan. There was plenty of other people waiting to take his spot, getting paid out by Rome. When he left, he pushed all in. So what does this tell us about Levi? That although he was living a fairly comfortable lifestyle, something was so missing inside of Levi. That there was a longing in his heart for something he couldn't find in anything else that the world had to offer. And so at the invitation of Jesus, he begins to follow. What does this tell us about Jesus? Jesus is someone who people like Levi are intrigued by. Jesus is somebody who guys like Levi, those names that came to mind when I said, do you know Levi? Who we kind of almost think they'd never want Christianity. They'd never want a relationship with Jesus. They're pretty well off. Jesus is the kind of person that intrigues people like Levi's. Sometimes we read these stories as individual entities in the Bible, right? We kind of just pull them out and we read them as if there was no cultural context or there was no context. But if you go back to verse 27, the text we're reading started this way: after this. After what? After Jesus had healed people in chapter 4, after Jesus had called a few of the other disciples at the beginning of chapter 5. In chapter 5, he cleanses a leper and he heals a paralytic man. After these things, and no doubt Levi had been hearing and seeing, possibly even observing Jesus' teaching, his healing, his ministry, his work in real life. He's been seeing it, and he's like, there's something different about this guy. There's something different about Jesus than any other religious person that I've seen. All the other Pharisees and teachers of the law and all those other guys, they don't look like Jesus. They don't treat people the way that Jesus treats people. Jesus is different. Jesus is the kind of person that I want to be around, Levi's thinking. And not just someone that he would enjoy being around, but I find it interesting that Levi thinks, I'll bet that Jesus guy, I'll bet you he'd come to dinner at my house. I'll bet you he'd come to a party at my house. And so Jesus invites Levi to follow him. And you know what I find interesting is Levi's first thought is, let's have a party. Let's party. Let's throw a dinner. Let's throw a banquet. Let's throw a party, and I'll invite all my friends, and I'm sure Jesus is going to love it. That's Levi's first thought. Isn't that fascinating? That's exactly what, and that's what happens, right? In verse 29. And Levi made him a great feast in his house, and there was a large company of tax collectors and others, we'll come back to that, reclining at table with them. We find out a little bit more about Levi here. He was obviously well off, at least in money, because he was able to throw a great feast. But more importantly, we find out about his social circle. Again, I mentioned this earlier. Levi wasn't popular with the religious people. So when Levi threw a party, he threw a party for all his friends, and all his friends were other tax collectors, sinners, this word, others. This is an interesting word, others. I like how the Message version puts it. Levi gave a large dinner at his home for Jesus. Everyone was there, taxmen and other disreputable characters as guests at the dinner. Other disreputable characters. We're not sure exactly who these others are, but clearly they're people who the religious people of the day, the church people of the day, were like, why are they here? Like, why? We don't hang out with those people. Everyone was, I think, a little uncomfortable at this meal. Like if we were to just kind of watch this play out, if we got to be on the perspective of just kind of watching this play out, I know the disciples were uncomfortable, right? Because they're now, they're hanging out with a guy who used to cheat them, right? These are fishermen, right? These were guys who worked with their hands. Matthew, Levi may have actually taxed them unfairly. That makes it weird, right? They're not quite sure. Disciples aren't quite sure what to do. I'm sure Jesus is a rabbi, and so all these other tax guys and others, disreputable characters, they're looking at Levi like, hey, you used to hang, man. We used to have these parties, but you used to not invite a rabbi. This just got weird, right? Can we still tell those jokes? Can we still drink that? Can we still have conversation around the thing that we used to have conversation around, right? Because the rabbi's here, right? I think the most comfortable person in an uncomfortable party was Jesus. He seems to be the most comfortable person in this environment with these others. Let me ask you, who are the others that you know? Do you know others in your life? People that are maybe described by that. People that you may not necessarily want to hang out with, or that maybe you're just a little uncomfortable with? Do you have others in your family? Do you have others in your workplace? Do you have others in your life? And maybe a more important question is this: if you don't know others, why not? Because Jesus seems to love this moment with the others, with the tax collectors. In fact, I think it tells us a lot about Jesus. Levi's first instinct is to invite Jesus into his home with his community. Remember, others, disreputable characters, other tax collectors. He says to Jesus, why don't you come hang out with my community? And Jesus says, yeah, I'll come. Yeah, I'll be there. Don't clean it up for me. I'll just come. Jesus longs to be with people in their lives wherever their lives are. And this seems to be, to me, opposite of sometimes what we think being a Christian's all about. Oftentimes we think about what a Christian is about is coming from outside, coming from the outside to the inside of the church or religion, to leave that out and come in. And it seems to me that Jesus leaves the temple often and goes out. If we watch Jesus in his ministry, he's constantly, yes, he spent time at the temple. He thought that was very important. He taught there, and he everything that was fine. I'm not making a statement about here. What I'm making a statement about is that we must leave here and go out, and there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's all Jesus was about, was going out into real lives. The gospel invitation we have from Jesus is that Jesus wants to be involved in our everyday life, to invade our space, our tables, our work and social lives, our sports teams, and our neighborhoods. Jesus didn't just come with a list of do's and don'ts. He came for relationship. He came for the table. He came to sit around the table. And so there's really two ways we can look at this story. We can see it from Levi's perspective. Are we inviting Jesus into our tables, into our lives? Because Jesus wants to come. Everything we learn about him from the Gospels is if we invite Jesus into our lives, around our tables, with our families, with our others, Jesus is going to say, yeah, I'll be there. I'll come. I'm all about it. So we can look at it from Levi's side, but we can also look at it from Jesus' side. Are we willing to go to the tables of other people? To sit around the table with people that maybe we feel a little bit uncomfortable with. Jesus accepts Levi's invitation, no strings attached. Jesus didn't say, yeah, I'll come, but could you leave those weirdos out? Right? Could you leave those people that make me a little uncomfortable at home? Maybe we shouldn't invite so-and-so. No strings attached. Jesus says, I'll be there. I'll come. And then the story gets even more uncomfortable because apparently the Pharisees have no problem kind of lurking outside and peering in windows. It's creepy, but they do it often in the Gospels. And the Pharisees and the scribes grumbled at his disciples. The Pharisees wouldn't have gone into the party. So what we can assume from this is that they are on the outside, like they're outside, and they're looking in at, and they're like, they're peering through the window, peering through the door, like, what is going on in there? And they grumbled to his disciples, saying, Why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners? Oh, this is so sneaky and so sick, right? They are on the outside. They won't go talk to Jesus. And so they pull his disciples out, and they're like, hey, come here. Why are you guys here? They pull Jesus' disciples out. Think about this. The disciples are in no place to answer this question. The disciples are probably thinking themselves, I don't know why we're here. This is really early in Jesus' ministry. They're still trying to figure it out themselves. They're like, I don't know why we're here. These guys, they just taxed me a few days ago. I don't know if I necessarily like them. They're in no place to answer this question from the Pharisees. But these Pharisees, they're doing this thing where they want to be very intimidating. And they've decided in their religious system who is in and who is out. Notice they didn't get on Jesus for inviting Levi to follow him. They got on him for eating dinner with him, for being around a table with him. The religious leaders had determined who it was okay to eat with and who it was not okay to eat with. See, sharing a meal in the first century was incredibly important, and it was an incredible social statement. It was not like, let's go grab a burger at McDonald's together, right? It was a statement of worth. It was an accepting of them as individuals and saying, you are part of me. That was what first century meals were about. But we're not so far off from that, right? Like we don't have quite the statement. Like we don't think meals are quite as big of a statement. Like we'll eat meals with people and not like use it as a defining thing about who they are sometimes. But throughout our history, we have used who we eat with as boundary markers in our society, haven't we? It hasn't been that long in our culture, friends, where people who looked different because of their color of skin, they couldn't sit at certain tables. It has not been that long in our culture. In fact, yesterday we celebrated, if you're in the baseball world, we celebrated Jackie Robinson Day, where this man who broke the color barrier into baseball. And you read these stories, and you read even, one of my favorite movies of all time is Remember the Titans. And just watching through that lens, where that was not that long ago, that was the 70s, right? Still in the 70s, where certain people were not allowed to eat at tables. We withheld tables because that was a boundary marker in our society. Maybe we're still not that far off from that by age, by economic level. You remember that back in school when you walked into the lunchroom as an elementary school or middle school, or maybe even still today as a high school, and you knew instantly when you walked in, you began to scan tables and you began to say, who do I belong with? And you knew that there was a group of tables because those popular people were sitting over there that you could not belong in. Because we have used tables forever in our history as a nation, but all the way back into Jesus' day and beyond, we've used it as boundary markers to say, these people are in, these people are out. And we feel that, don't we? Sometimes we feel that. Sometimes we sit at a table and we're like, I don't belong here. There's one time, this was years ago, I went to a pastor's breakfast, right? And it sounds as exciting as it is as exciting as it sounds, right? So we went to this pastor's breakfast. No, it was really encouraging. It was great. And I got a good meal out of it. And so went there, and I just picked a table. I was by myself, so I just grabbed my food and picked a table. I'm kind of a person that likes to sit up front. It's weird, I know. Because I like to be right in the middle of it. And so I picked this table pretty close to the front, sat down at it, was eating, and then I started seeing the other people that started sitting around the table. And then I noticed, because I'm really observant, all these like plaques around the table. And it was all like the main speakers for this breakfast and like the musicians and all that. And instantly I just so these other guys started sitting down that were going to be speaking and leading worship and all this stuff. And I'm just sitting there, right? And I felt like maybe I don't belong at this table. We feel that at times. Maybe I don't belong here. This table's above me. They were all fantastic men. And I was like, I'll move, guys. And they're like, no, sit here, like hang out. They were fantastic. They were very Jesus-like in that moment. But I felt it, and maybe you have too, where you've sat at a table and you all of a sudden came to realize, I don't know if I belong at this table. Socially, economically, age-wise, mentally, like educationally, I don't belong here. And Jesus just doesn't seem the least bit concerned with man-made boundary markers when he's willing to sit at the table with anybody and everybody. He doesn't care. Those boundaries that we use, and even as kids in elementary school, the popular kids and the non-popular, he doesn't care about any of that. He doesn't care about age or race or religion or politics or any of that. He'll sit at the table with anybody that will invite him to be there. It's interesting, this word companion that we use in our society, our companion, if you break that word down, that word com means with, and the word pan means bread. So companion literally means someone you will share bread with. And the Pharisees decided, and the religious people of the day, they decided to use the table as a boundary marker and say, Jesus, you shouldn't be eating with these people. You're eating with the wrong people. And Jesus just says, my table's a lot bigger than you could ever imagine it being. And I'll eat with whoever I want to eat with. So the Pharisees, remember, they pulled the disciples away. They thought they were being sneaky. They pulled them away to chat with them. Jesus was having none of it. The disciples, we don't hear what they say. Jesus observes this, and Jesus is like, I'll answer that question. And Jesus answered them, those who have no need of a physician, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. Jesus says, listen, I have come to heal the world. How are you going to do that, Jesus? How are you going to heal the world? by eating with them, by sitting at a table with them, by hanging out even with these others that the religious people want no part of. Jesus is like, that's how I'm going to heal the world. I'm going to eat with them. I'm going to associate with them. It's interesting to me, the Bible has quite a few places where it makes this statement about Jesus, and Jesus makes this statement about himself. The Son of Man has come, fill in the blank. If you read through the Gospels, if you're familiar with the Gospels, right, we hear this statement, the Son of Man. Think about all those times where it says the Son of Man has come. The Son of Man has come. The first ones that came to my mind was like, the Son of Man came to seek and save that which was lost, right? Or we have the Son of Man came to not to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. We have these statements that Jesus would make, and he would say, the Son of Man came. You know what I find interesting? In Luke chapter 7, Jesus says this about himself. He says, the Son of Man came eating and drinking. The Son of Man came eating and drinking. It does not say the Son of Man came with a list of do's and don'ts. Or it does not say that the Son of Man has come to establish a new law system that we must encounter God with. If we want to get to God, here's the new system here's how we get to God. No, when Jesus says, he says, I have come, the Son of Man has come eating and drinking. In other words, when God put on flesh and came to earth to show us what he is like, he came to show us how to live in relationship. He came to show us how to sit around a table, how to relate to people who are different than us, who are others, who the rest of the religious people had said, no, they're out. And Jesus is like, no, I came for them, and I came to eat with them. I came to dine with them. I came to sit around a table with them, with the hurting, the lost. You know what we don't find Jesus sitting around tables doing? Never in the Gospels will you hear this. Jesus was not sitting around the table arguing about politics, complaining about the homeless, arguing about theology, saying, well, clean up your life a little bit and then you can come sit at this table. It's not what we see Jesus do anywhere in the Gospels. We don't see him at the table, arms folded, brow furrowed. In fact, the snapshots we see of Jesus, he seems like he's the most comfortable person there. He seems like he's the one enjoying the table more than anybody else there. Why? Why could he do that? Because it's exactly what he came to earth to do. It's what God did when he decided to come in. He decided to come and eat and drink. He decided to come to sit around a table with people who didn't have it all together, the people who were far off from God, to get to know the others and to show the others what he is like, to show a relational God who is accessible to all. And in order to accomplish this, lines would need to be broken, boundaries would be crossed. And this is what Jesus did. And it's what he's inviting us to do. It's what when he came into the scene, when he came onto the scene, he's like, I'm here to do a new thing. You guys all know the social boundaries. You all know how we've been doing life. I've come to bring a new thing into existence. I've come to fundamentally change the foundation of how we relate to people. And it's not on a merit of a status or how much they know. He enters into this room. And this can be challenging for us, right? We live in this fast food restaurant, eat at your desk, on the go, eat on the go culture. And what we see today and what we'll see at weeks to come is that Jesus spends time at tables, as long as it takes at tables to reveal to others who he really is. Because if you had notes to write them in, I tell you to write them in this spot. Tables help us to get to know others. Tables help us to get to know others. Just mental brain, or you can put it in your phone. It's not that hard to remember. Tables help us get to know the others. Let me ask you, is your table open? Is your table open? Are you willing to go to and accept invitations from people who open their table to you? Because that's what we see Jesus doing. Jesus comes for everyone. He comes for the sinners, the outcasts, the tax collectors, the people caught in impossible choices and failed dreams. He comes for the executives and the street people alike. He comes for the celebrities. He comes for the farmers. He comes for the addicts. He comes for the IRS agents. He comes for the lawyers, and he even comes for used car salesmen. He comes for all of us. And Jesus doesn't just talk with them, he eats with them. It's interesting that here Jesus seems to be saying that as he's ushering in a new system, as he's ushering in the gospel age, the kingdom age, he's making a statement that we've lost somewhere along the way. Jesus' invitation all the way into Revelation chapter 3, he makes this statement, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him." And what is he going to do? He's going to eat with him, and he with me. It seems as the gospel continues to outpour, Jesus still wants to have dinner with the outsiders. Jesus still wants to have dinner with people who are sinners, who are far off from God, because he doesn't want them to be eternally far off from him. Jesus seems to suggest that one of the greatest tasks that we can have as a church, one of the greatest things that we can do as a church is simply this: eat with people. Shouldn't be that hard, right? We have to eat anyway. To eat with people, to be around people. Is it possible that before we invite people to church, we should probably invite them over for dinner? Do you think that the people, those others that you know who say, church isn't for me. I went to church a long time ago, but I just been hurt by the church, or I fell away from religion, or I want nothing to do with religion. I want nothing to do with church. You think it's possible that they might accept a dinner invitation? Because I really believe, church, that's where Jesus wants us to go. I think that he would smile just as wide with your friends and coworkers who don't know him sitting at your table as he would if they were in this building. As long as you're living gospel-centered. As long as you're living it out. I love this quote. I bumped into it this week. And this one has just stuck with me since I heard it. Listen carefully. It may be that America is not post-Christian at all. It may be that America is instead pre-Christian, a land that, though often Christ-haunted, has never known the power of the gospel yet. Somebody else walk around and say, we live in post-Christian America, we live in post-Christian America. Maybe not. Maybe we live in pre-Christian America. And if a group of people got around this idea that says, you know what? No, we're not going to walk around anymore and just believe that we are just need to huddle in our churches and be frightened, but we can get outside and invite people to our house for dinner, that we can go be Jesus to the world around us. Maybe we've just begun to see what Jesus can do. We're going to reference it later on in this series. This whole series, though, all I have been thinking about as I've been thinking about and preparing for is the movie Jesus Revolution. I don't know if you've seen it yet. I want to challenge you this. If you've not seen Jesus Revolution, it is everything that we're talking about in this series. And it will move you, and it's a powerful movie. And so if you haven't seen it yet, we're gonna reference it at times in this series because I think it's so it's so tied up in everything that this series is about and what really Jesus was about. And so do yourself a favor and go see it if you haven't. We'll talk about it a little bit more next week because it ties in there. But that movie centered around a group of people who were just like, you know what? Jesus is still on the move, and he can do something. And I believe that that can still happen today. But it's going to start at tables, probably before it starts in this room. So what tables are you going to? And who's invited to your table? I'm challenge you throughout this series, this week even, invite somebody over for dinner. Start there. Just invite somebody to dinner. Share a table with somebody. If you're not in a position where you can invite somebody to your table at your home, share a table this week with somebody. Go to coffee with a coworker maybe. How about this? Rather than spending your breaks at work on your phone, spend it in relationship with people. Talk to somebody. Find somebody to communicate with, to talk with. Engage with somebody, even if they are the others from our story. Families, I want to challenge you to make space at your table, to eat together as a family. I want to encourage you, families, if you're in the same kind of age stage as I am, make space for your kids' friends at your table. Even if your kids' friends say, do, and talk about things you have no interest in whatsoever, make space for them at your table. It will mean more than you ever know. Parents, if you are in here and you have grown kids, invite your kids over for dinner. And even if they're very different than you, even if they don't believe the same things you believe anymore, even if they vote politically different than you, even if you don't like what they talk about, are they welcome at your table still? Use your table as a gathering place. Again, if you want, grab a box on the way out and make it a part of your rhythm. Just try new things as a family. Your kids may complain in the moment, but they'll love it on the inside because you're making space for them. Throughout this series, The Table, I just want us to see over and over and over again how so much of Jesus' life happens around tables in relationships with people. And we can do that because that's what Jesus has called us to do, is to be at tables with others, the others, and make space for people like that in our lives. May we never be, friends, and I know this is often the first, may we never be the Pharisees who are on the outside looking in saying, why are those people eating with them? Oh, may we never be those people. Because that is not the heartbeat of the gospel. That is not the heartbeat of Jesus. May we never be Pharisees. May we always make space at our table for anybody who will come and encounter Jesus. Let's pray. God, thank you for our time together in your word. This is a challenging series, this is a challenging message. You constantly challenge me, Jesus, to think differently, to see differently. And I just want to ask that you would give us moments around tables this week. And that at those tables we would invite the others to be there with us. And just see what you want to accomplish there. Thank you for your example in that, Jesus. In your name we pray. Amen.